Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the Bleav Network, and joining me to talk about a couple very realistic Rockets potential trade targets is my Bleav Network colleague, host of Bleav and Blazers, Peter Sampson. Happy holidays, Peter, and I hope you're having some positives in Portland this year to follow.
Yeah, I mean, lately we are. They've won 2 in a row. I know that doesn't sound like anything impressive, but I'll tell you the way things have gone for the Blazers over the last 3.25 years, we're thrilled with that. Young talent, yet to put it together, but we're finding our bright spots around Christmas. We'll just say that.
Yeah, and Portland's a team that I've always had a fun time being a fan of. I mean, we loved Portland down here when Clyde was up there because Clyde Drexler, was such a, Houston legend before he even came back down with the Rockets. But, there are a couple of Blazers I could see the Rockets actually pursuing at the deadline. That's kind of why I wanted to have you on. And they need a playmaker and shooter at guard. So Anfernee Simons is somebody that I've definitely talked about on my show. The other is, of course, Robert Williams, a.k.a. Timelord, who helped Udoka's Celtics get to the finals. So they've got a good relationship. And one reason this all intrigues me is maybe this would intrigue Rafael Stone and Joe Cronin, is it could be a package deal, and that might maximize Portland's compensation and the Rockets' return. Now, I can't imagine Timelord is not on the trade market, Peter, but what about Simons? Is he a guy definitely on the trade market?
I mean, everything that Joe Cronin is saying and believing are two different things. He's certainly saying, we're happy to keep this guy. We want to see how Simons can play alongside Shaedon Sharpe, how he can play alongside Scoot Henderson. But look, if you're going to rebuild, I mean, truly tear everything down to the studs and start over, you have to move on from Anfernee Simons. You just have to. You got to see how Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson are going to play together in big minutes. And, Portland certainly has a problem where they have some really nice young pieces, admittedly, but they don't have the guy, right? And to really compete, you got to have your version of the guy, Alperen Sengun, the guy. And they're not going to be able to find that guy if he's potentially on the roster, if Anfernee Simons is maybe sort of blocking the way. It's potentially Shaedon Sharpe, maybe Scoot Henderson. Yeah, we could talk about that later. But Simons, he's a little too good to not play, and he's not necessarily the difference maker in the role that Portland is using him. I think if you're looking at Simons as maybe, a 29 to 32 minute, I mean, especially if you could find a sixth man role for Anfernee Simons, or at least have him maybe be a secondary playmaker, but you're looking for, him to just be able to spot up and bury threes, he's a good fit. So that was a long-winded way of saying, Joe Cronin hasn't necessarily tipped his hand, but I think if the right offer's out there, a few of these guys are available. Anfernee Simons is one of them.
His three-point shooting way down this season. That's the big thing with him. He's a 38% guy from three for his career, but only 32.7 this year. Is there a reason for his shooting woes?
I haven't seen anything, some sort of nagging injury can often explain that with these guys. Nothing's really out there that I've heard, in practice or at the games or anything like that. But he got off to a really cold start. He seems to maybe be turning it around. He did have a game winner last week. Really nice to see. Of course, it wasn't a three, but he's picked it up a little bit. But I think a lot of it's sort of how Chauncey Billups is using him. And I'm going to throw Jeremy Grant into this as well, who's another potential trade target for some team out there. But so you have these young guys, you have, you have Scoot Henderson, you have Shaedon Sharpe, you have Denny Avdia, who is basically the best trailblazer this year. You've got Toumani Camara, who was a steal in the Yusuf Nurkic, DeAndre Ayton trade, who's a great two-way player. His offense is coming along. He's already an elite defender. And if you're rebuilding, you want to play these guys, you want to move. But anytime you get into the fourth quarter, it's almost instructional that, okay, we're going to stop what we're doing. We're going to ISO. We're going to pound the rock. And the termination point in every possession is going to be Simons or Jeremy Grant. And you end up with Anfernee Simons almost, I'm not going to say he's taking bad shots. He's shown he can hit them, but he's just pounding the rock. Teams know to press up, to come over the screen. The ball's not necessarily leaving his hands. And the thing is, I don't think this is Anfernee Simons making poor decisions. He's not really, maybe he's not a natural point guard. He's a combo guard, but he's not really a selfish player per se. It almost seems by design. If he was in a slightly different role, I think you're looking at a better shot selection and you're going to see that percentage continue to tick up.
For those of us who don't get a chance to watch him on a regular basis, can you describe his game, the positives and negatives?
Yeah, so he's not very tall. He's probably, I think he came into the league at 6'3". He's definitely grown. He's probably 6'4". Some people say 6'5". That's nonsense. He's one of those tweeners, right? Like he's not necessarily quick enough to play the point. Mostly he's just not a natural facilitator. He sort of telegraphs his passes, but he doesn't have that true length that you want to see out of a classic shooting guard. But in today's NBA, it's a lot more is sort of positionless, right? Very streaky shooter, but maybe more consistent than a lot of the guys that you would think of as a typically inconsistent or streaky shooter. But he can really get the motor going. He had a 25 or 6 point quarter just probably 3 weeks ago in a game, just went off. He's really athletic. He doesn't use a lot of his verticality, but he's won a dunk contest. He can definitely get up, but he's great at getting downhill. And one thing I've really been impressed with this year, even with the numbers being down, his finishing around the rim. He's able to beat his man off the dribble because he's relatively quick. He's not, peak Westbrook or something like that, but he's able to beat his man off the dribble and really get separation with his body, and especially finish, for anyone watching as opposed to listening, sort of finish at an angle to get over some of the bigger guys, as the NBA's maybe moved back into a lot of the bigger centers again. He's not a natural facilitator. If you're playing him with another ball handling guard or maybe a forward that can bring the ball up, he can sort of take turns and, get off the ball. Great spot up shooter, but I don't love him in that role, like as a starting point guard per se. I don't love that, but he's versatile on offense. He's athletic, pretty poor defender. The effort wanes, even with the effort being there at times, when you can tell that Billups has gotten on him a little bit. He's just not naturally a good defender. He's quick, but he just defensively, he's not great at getting into position, lacks a lot of the lateral movement.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was wondering about, because he's an athlete for sure. And he's got a little bit of a wingspan for a guy that's his size. I'm wondering if you get him in a situation where, it's much more of a competitive team, something where he's got to, pull his own weight defensively. And it's hard, I'm sure, to focus at times when you're Portland and struggling as much as they have the last few years. If you got him in a different situation with Udoka, do you think that could make a difference? Could Udoka work with him, as good a defensive guy as he is?
I think it could. I don't think he'll ever be even an average defender, but I think in the right system with the right, we'll call it coach motivation, I think he could be not a terrible defender. And I mean, right now we're talking bottom 10 defensive metrics, basically since he's been a full-time player, which, I mean, it's crazy. He's only 25, but he's in his 7th year in the league. He came in so young out of IMG. There's definitely opportunity for improvement there, but again, you're never going to see a guy that's a ball stopper. I mean, Scoot Henderson, with all of his struggles so far, is already by far a better defensive option at point guard, but he does have the length. I mean, Billups, we could talk about that later, but Billups, for all his preaching of defense, he's not a defensive-minded coach. And you have Ime Udoka, a Portland guy, by the way. I'll rep some Ime Udoka. I love that guy. He doesn't just talk the talk, right? He gets his guys to actually play defense. There's an actual system. There's an actual philosophy there. I think that you would probably see some improvement. He wouldn't be at least a sieve.
Kind of where I look at him with the Rockets is, he be a 6-man for sure. They could use anybody at guard that could shoot the ball and make some shots and that sort of thing. But also he would be a good fit for the Rockets, because if he is hot on a certain game, then he might be in late in games as a guy that's able to spread the floor and help Şengün make some space for him. And, you never know once you get a guy at a different situation. And the Blazers really haven't had anybody that's been able to draw and had gravity to get guys maybe as wide open as the Rockets and what they're able to do with Şengün. It's just the unfortunate thing is the Rockets just don't have anybody that can even take advantage of that gravity as much as we would like, with the way Van Vliet and Jalen Green have shot.
Anfernee Simons in a 6th-man role. I mean, those of us that really watch a lot of games, I mean, even a lot of the casual fans, I mean, they're going to say what they say, but we've been kind of calling for that 6th-man role for a while. The issue is when they kind of tore it down to the studs, and then you had to extend him, and he's making, it's roughly $25 million a year. It's of course an escalating contract. He's going to make 28 next year. I mean, as the cap increases, that's market rate. But say last year and the year before, I mean, if you're a team that's going to win, say 25 games, you're not going to pay a guy $25 million and then have him come off the bench, even if that's really the right role for him. So you put him in a situation that, again, I mean, if you're talking Sinjun coming out in the high post and facilitating, bringing down low, again, you're so many open shots for a guy like Ant. I think he would absolutely thrive. He would take a lot of the pressure off. Again, maybe the ball handling, he could do it. But if he doesn't have to worry about that, and it's just, man, feed the ball into Sinjun, get open, curl around, maybe run a few pick and pops, pick and rolls, he would just feast.
Any discussion, Peter, on what would be expected back in a trade for him? And are there any rumored teams that you've heard of?
I haven't heard any rumored teams. I mean, I've heard some for Rob Williams. I haven't really heard any for Jeremy Grant aside from the Lakers. But I think they're playing it close with Anfernee Simons. And there's so many questions about his value, right? Because, again, he's making the money. You look at the cap increasing, but also there's the apron now, which is, I mean, it's effectively a hard cap. And what team... I mean, the Rockets make total sense, but aside from that, I mean, how many teams are in Anfernee Simons' way? Okay, a guy who can shoot the lights out, facilitate a little bit, but can't play a lick of defense. I mean, there's a decent amount of those. But I think, and I'm purely spitballing here, if a team offered expiring money and truly, and it was a first that wasn't, you'd throw protections on that, of course, but it wasn't absurdly protected, like top 20 protected or something like that, I think he'd be attainable. And the big thing, it's really been Scoot Henderson's play, I think, is what all of this hinges on. Because the way Scoot started the season, we all know he had an atrocious start to his year last year. I mean, after 10 games or whatever, he was shooting 8% from three. I mean, he was just terrible. And then he suffered the injury. Really picked it up at the end of last season. You were seeing a lot of, 18-9, 20-12 games from Scoot. And it's like, here we go. Here we go. He's hitting the three, and he's never, I don't think, going to be a great three-point shooter. But with his quicks, if he can just shoot it at 34.5%, like, you're golden if you're a Blazers fan. He was starting to do that. So you go, okay, he's got an off season. He can work on his finishing, especially with his offhand. He can work on minimizing the turnovers, maybe chilling out on defense, not committing fouls. And then he came in and it was the same thing. If anything, the handles were worse. If you're Joe Cronin, you're looking at that and you're going, I cannot trade Anfernee Simons and have this guy bust. That being said, things have slowly started to look better. And the last in 2 games, that's not a sample size, of course, but he's 18.5 and 8 assists, 1 turnover in that span. That's a great average. If you can keep something close to that, I think you're going to look at the market start to heat up for Simons, as maybe Cronin's a little more amenable to looking for that low first-round pick.
In a few seconds, I want to ask you about Timelord, and later we're going to get into the Blazers rookie who was for a second rumored to be a Rockets draft choice. But first of all, if you fans of Houston Sports Talk enjoy our content, tell your friends and share our links on your social media. If you've got takes on the Rockets, let me know in the YouTube comments. And in case you miss it, I talked to USA Today Rockets analyst Ben Dubose in my last show on a fun deep dive into De'Aaron Fox Rockets trade ideas. On Sunday, Tom Chavaria and I break down Texans versus Titans in our live postgame show. Subscribe to us on YouTube so you can get updates and all the new content. Give us a thumbs up and listen on the go with your favorite podcast app. All right, Peter, I'm going to come back to Simons in a bit, but let's move to Timelord. How healthy has Robert Williams looked, and does he look close to the defensive presence that we saw with the Celtics?
Yeah, it's interesting. Played 6 games for the Blazers last year before having the knee issue. As I understood it, obviously they keep medical stuff pretty close to the vest. As I understand it, he could have potentially come back at the end of the year. They're like, we could kind of repair this, or you could take the year off and really fix this. We all know his issue with knees, especially. Took the year off. I think it was the right move. He did suffer a concussion. He's missed 4 or 5 games now with a concussion, came back from that, lightly tweaked the ankle. Honestly, I think a big part of this with their bigs is they have 4 centers on the roster. They want to make sure no one's getting injured as we approach February. But when he's played, he has been just dominant, and we're talking in like 19 to 21 minute stretches. If you don't watch, if you're a Blazers fan, watching this, because I've shared it on social media, and you didn't watch a lot of Celtics basketball back in the day, I mean, he's just as good as he was in those stretches. The only thing is, can he stay on the court? But what's really surprised me is his facilitation and just his kind of touch around the basket is a little better than I remember with the Celtics. But just defensively, he's the only guy and that communicates on defense on the Blazers. I mean, DeAndre Ayton doesn't do it. Donovan Clingan, I know he's a rookie. He's young. You're maybe not going to be calling guys out for being in the wrong position, but he's got that rep, right? I thought maybe this is going to be the guy that's going to change that culture. He's not yet, even though I expect it to come. But I mean, Robert Williams, everyone on defense, all 5 guys on the court pick it up a notch when he's on there. And honestly, I'm kind of bummed out that he hasn't played in the last few games because he's been one of the few bright spots for the team.
We kind of assume the Rockets are going to be reluctant to give up a first-round pick because they're trying to keep all their assets for the star they're looking for. But my thought is maybe they'd give up a first for 2 pieces. So let me throw this at you, Peter. And I've double-checked this in the ESPN trade machine. The Rockets gave up a first and a second-round pick in this deal. Say if they give up a first and a second, plus the expiring contracts of Steven Adams, Jeff Green, Jock Landale, and Jayshawn Tate for Simons and Williams. The Blazers then flip those 4 vets to contenders for second-round picks. So potentially for the Blazers, it could be a first and 4 or 5 seconds. Is that fair? And I don't even know if the Rockets would think a first-round pick is overrated, because it seems like it's sort of a tweener with Williams and Simons. So I don't know, but do you think that's fair?
Maybe. I know Joe Cronin, so it's kind of gotten out. And of course, GMs, they leak things to sort of hedge their position on the trade market. But I really get the impression that Joe Cronin is more than content to just keep Robert Williams III. Like he's been such a good influence on the team. And that, don't get me wrong, if he gets an offer, like a real offer that he really likes, I think he's going to take it. But I don't think he feels the pressure to really make a move like we all kind of assumed was going to happen last year before he got hurt, and that we assumed was going to happen this year. Now, would it shock me if he is moved before February? Not at all. Not even remotely. But I truly think it's not a 75, 80, 90% chance he gets moved. I think it's a coin flip. And I know they're more interested in moving DeAndre Ayton. Of course, good luck with that. I don't need to wax poetically for 10 minutes or so about why that will not happen. I think maybe you could move him next year at the deadline just because he's an expiring. But I do think he's content to keep Robert Williams III. You don't have anyone else that's really showing those sort of defensive habits, hard work habits. I mean, he was a champion. There's a reason for that. That being said, I don't know if they would do a combo deal. I mean, I don't hate the deal personally. I just know that Cronin is kind of looking for more, and I think he might look to for a low first for Simons and another. Again, it's not going to be a high first. I mean, Robert, he has to show that he can stay on the court, but another low first for Williams as well. Now, that being said, if those 2 separate markets don't really materialize, at a certain point, you have to open up spots. Again, the Blazers have 4 centers on their roster. They have Timelord. They have DeAndre Ayton, who, look, I'm going to give him a bunch of flack, but I also think simultaneously, and this is weird, I think he also kind of gets too much flack in the national media. Like he's a weird dude. He's not bad. It's just the stuff he says, man. You've got Donovan Clingan, who was the number 7 pick, who is just showing insane defensive potential. I know you want to talk about him.
Yeah, hold that thought.
Yeah. And then you've got Duop Reith, who is an end of the bench guy. Don't get me wrong, but he's just a pure stretch center. Basically, if you just need a 7-footer who's just going to park at the 3-point line, you've got that as well. So they've got to do something with someone. We already mentioned Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson. You have Anfernee Simons, who deserves 33, 34 minutes. Well, how do you open that up? So I think if you get closer to the deadline, he's not getting that sort of separate deal that he wants to maximize those returns. I wouldn't be shocked if he took something like that.
Yeah, it just looks like the market has changed on first-round picks. You see what's going on with what Brooklyn is getting for we just saw Finney Smith, and that would normally have been a first-round pick with Finney Smith going to the Lakers.
That was crazy. Well, it was 3 second rounders with Russell.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and I know who I saw someone in the news yet who was really chasing Finney Smith. There was someone else. It wasn't Miami, was it? I know someone was looking after him really hard. I'm surprised the Brooklyn did that. I mean, cap space is valuable. Picks are valuable. I mean, it's a different landscape.
The thing is with first round picks is like so many teams of the contenders don't have first round picks because they've gone all in and they've traded all their first round picks. The team that the teams you got to go talk to, and they have no interest in getting these borderline guys because they've got all these first round picks. Or, Utah has racked up a bunch of first round picks, and OKC might be the one contender that can make those type of trades. But otherwise, you're definitely not going to get first round picks out of a lot of these teams because they just don't have them to give. I mean, they've basically given away all their ammo. So if you want something, you might have to settle for second round picks, or at least, like you said, protected, some sort of protection or something like that. Pick swaps, maybe in the first round, that might be their best option.
I think pick swaps might be where this ends up going. Back to the value of first round picks. Another thing too is again with that hard cap. I know rookie scale, it's not that much, but if you're a team like Brooklyn, it's like, how many first rounders are we going to rack up? We have to pay those guys. We have to pay them. And you're only talking a few million here, a few million there. Second round picks, I mean, look, it's just a crapshoot. Non-guaranteed contracts can end up saving a decent amount of money, whether it's just to, chase free agents or just, frankly, cheap out. But the pick swaps really is the thing. I know in the Damian Lillard deal, you got the one pick, but it's really the two back end pick swaps with Milwaukee that really have the value, depending on how they age out and restock. So, I mean, that is another option. I know Cronin's not afraid to do that. The more I think about these second round picks, the more I do not hate the value. I mean, they do have a Mike Schmitz, the ESPN draft guru, is Cronin's assistant now, and he's done a great job finding value in the draft. So, I mean, under the previous regime, Neil O'Shea, I didn't necessarily love their second round draft record. I mean, it would be guys that would get minutes because he would demand that they would be played. But I do trust the current regime a lot more in the draft, even if you're talking, say, in that maybe 30 to 40 pick range.
You mentioned Donovan Clingan, and the Rockets at one point rumored to be interested in drafting him instead of Reed Shepherd. What do you think about Clingan so far?
I was a little surprised. I was a Donovan Clingan fan, and I know they did not hold that as a secret. It was clear Portland was into Donovan Clingan. I'm like, okay, I mean, look, champion pedigree, big center. I mean, you wonder how the conditioning is going to be, coming in as such a big guy. But again, you go like, man, you got DeAndre Ayton making on a max deal. You've got Robert Williams III coming back. How are you going to find time for these guys? But the stars kind of aligned, and he fell to Portland at number 7. He's been great, man. I mean, right off the bat, I think he had a block in his first, it was like 18 games as a rookie. He's not able to play really heavy minutes yet, as again, he kind of acclimates to the NBA game. It's nothing that you don't see with 7-footers coming out of college, right? But the defensive instincts are there. He's kind of getting the rookie whistle a little bit, and it seems like he's hitting the wall a tiny bit here just in the last few games. That doesn't mean that he's struggling per se, but he's not having these 4 or 5 minute stretches where it's like, that guy's a monster. No one can score on this guy. The rookie whistle, as I mentioned a little bit. He did suffer a grade 2 MCL sprain. I was really worried that was going to keep him out for a good chunk of time. I mean, recovery on that thing is usually, it's like 2 months. And he was back in, I think, 2.5 weeks. He came back, didn't miss a beat. But I've been impressed. I got to be honest. I was sort of second guessing the decision, not the player, but the decision to draft, a 4th center. But he's clearly part of the future with the Trailblazers. That future defensive anchor that you look at on a rebuilding team, because how is it with young teams? You got guys trying to get their shot, trying to prove they belong in the league, and no one is really trying to make it on the defensive end. This is a guy that knows where his bread is buttered from day one, and you got to have that guy, right? So I've been impressed.
Yeah, when the Rockets played the Blazers, there was that back-to-back that they had, and I just was so impressed with how much space that he took up. He's bigger than he even looked in college, as opposed to Reed Shepherd, who frankly looks smaller in some ways, plays smaller than he looked in college. So there's a real dichotomy there when I watch those two guys, and I'm like, I was just so impressed because against the Rockets, he was doing an incredible job on the boards against a Rockets team that's one of the best, if not the best, rebounding team in the NBA. And what I really thought was that, like you said, they've got these other bigs. What's the point of Donovan Clingan? But none of the bigs that they had were long-term guys. And I was like, well, that's just a smart thing to do, that you take the best player on the board. You kind of don't worry about position. And, he looked really impressive. And, the way he was setting screens and stuff, it's the same type of stuff that we see with Steven Adams. What a game changer that makes when you have a big guy that can set really great screens like that. It just opens things up for your guards, and it just makes a lot of space. And you don't understand it until you have one of those type of guys and you see what it does for the rest of the team.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, DeAndre Ayton, obviously the better offensive player than Donovan Clingan. Clingan, he can hit a three occasionally, but it's pretty much just dunks and putbacks. But DeAndre Ayton on the flip side, take a shot every time that guy makes physical contact setting a screen. He just shows and pops so he can take that 17-footer. And, I mean, it works to a degree, but then you swap him out, you bring Clingan in, and it's just bone-jarring picks. I mean, he put one on. I don't think it was Kyrie, but he had one in the Mavericks game that the Blazers played last night. I mean, just absolutely just sent the guy sprawling. It's one of those things where it's like, that has to be an illegal screen, right? No, he's set. He's just that big. And I mean, Damian Lillard had that for years with Yusuf Nurkic. And Nurkic, again, a very imperfect player, but one thing he could do is just absolutely get his guard space. And Clingan's got that in spades already.
Let's switch to another sliding doors moment between the Blazers and Rockets. And it seems like these two teams always have these draft picks that are sliding doors, because even if you go way back, and I'm old enough to remember when Rockets fans wanted to get Clyde Drexler, instead they drafted Rodney McCray. So Clyde ends up dropping down to the Blazers, and that was a major change in Rockets history, potentially. And right before the 22 NBA draft, a large part of the Rockets fan base felt Amen Thompson was a better prospect than Scoot Henderson. And I couldn't tell if they were trying to talk themselves into it because the Rockets dropped to fourth in the lottery, or whether they really believed it. Do you feel like the Blazers fan base is keeping an eye on Amen Thompson and maybe a little frustrated that they drafted the wrong guy?
Yes. After I answer this here, I can give you, if we're talking Blazers Rockets deep lore, I can tell you an amazing story that basically, like, very few people know going back to the 90s. I'm going to tell you. But first, some are. Most aren't. But I mean, I had a few friends that in the biz that know what's up, and they're saying the Blazers should take Amen Thompson here. And even I was like, man, that's crazy. Now, on the flip side, I mean, I watched Scoot in the G League as much as I could, this super hyped prospect. And I was impressed, but the level of hype was too high, right? Am I crazy? He was good, and he showed that athleticism, but a lot of people are comparing him to like Ja Morant and stuff, and he's athletic, but it's not verticality, it's quickness. And I'm not surprised at the struggles, especially with the shooting. Maybe I was surprised with the depth of the struggles, but I mean, Amen Thompson there, one thing you can't teach is that level of athleticism. And I mean, defensively too, he's so good. So I don't know that there's necessarily a lot of shoulda, woulda, coulda, but I know a lot of Blazers fans are 1 foot off the Scoot Henderson bandwagon. Again, the play's better. There's still Bleav, but just, this franchise changing prospect. Well, probably not. Okay, not to derail this. I have an amazing Clyde Drexler related Houston story. So go back to, oh gosh, if the Moda Center, which we still call the Rose Garden, if you're a Blazers fan, opened doors it was 95, 96, and so this had to have been 93 is my guess. I mean, I was a kid, but my father was a contractor, and he put in a bid, and he was looking to do the glass. Like, I'm going to install the glass at this place. Didn't get the bid, but he was there, and he was there when they broke ground. Like, the mayor comes out and we all do this stuff, and we dig the dirt, and it's all fun, and we cut a ribbon. They had an artist there, and they were putting the dirt from the groundbreaking into like buckets, right? Okay, cool, I guess. They had an artist there who was drawing Blazers like caricatures, like when you go to a fair and you have the guy draw your caricature and you look all funny, you know what I mean? He was doing it in the dirt. And so you have like, Cliff Robinson and all these guys. And my dad only saw this. He went off behind. This is not like where the event is. And he's just looking at a guy's doing this. My dad's not a basketball fan. Like, he's not really a sports guy. And he's like, oh yeah, they had Clyde. They had this. They had Hakeem Olajuwon number 34. And who's that? And he's there. And I was like, he's not a Blazer. And he's like, I was there. I saw it. Who is that? I can't forget that name. And then someone grabbed me and said, oh, you're not supposed to be here, and shuttled him away. And I swear to you, they were looking, Clyde and Hakeem wanted to play together. We know that. They were looking to grab Hakeem, and they were close. Didn't work out. And Clyde says, look, man, then you got to trade me to Houston. Blazers, I swear to you, this was on the verge.
Oh my, yeah. It was a huge moment. I mean, I was about 22, I guess, in '93. So, and when he came back, it was, so incredible awesome. Because to reunite those guys for a kid that grew up rooting for Phi Slamma Jamma, it was just unbelievable. And of course, I mean, there's just like all these weird Rockets Blazers moments where, the Rockets draft. Is it Ralph and then Sam Bowie was next, or was it? Do I have the year right?
I think Ralph was 83, right? Sam Bowie was 84. It was Hakeem.
Oh, it was Hakeem and then Bowie. Yeah.
Lost the Blazers lost the coin flip with Houston. So Houston took Hakeem, Blazers took Bowie, and we know what Chicago did at number 3.
Yeah, exactly. And the other part about, when you look at Amen Thompson right now, and if there's some of your Blazers fans that are watching this, if you ask the Rockets people right now, the second best Rocket is Amen Thompson. And I don't think it's really close. It's Şengün and then Amen. And the only reason he's not starting, because he is the second best player on the team, is just sort of politics. I mean, Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet, because their veterans are out there. Yeah. And then Jabari and Jalen, because they were high draft choices. And Jabari's, he fits really well with Şengün. So I think that's a big part of it. And Amen is just the Swiss Army knife that comes off the bench for whoever they need him to come off the bench, but he comes off pretty early. But when he started, he looks great. He started the other night against Minnesota and was 2010 that night. So I mean, when you look at what Amen Thompson can do, he might have the most potential of any Rocket if he gets it all together. It's just, the shooting is the one last component to it. But you ask any Rockets fan and they're just absolutely thrilled. And he's the type of guy also that you want, because he just seems incredibly cool and does not seem to get rattled, does not seem to run out of energy. He's just, his effort is just nonstop. The defense is all NBA already. So it's a really we got blessed because we made that choice there and got lucky that, some guys dropped. And, it's like sometimes you get lucky in those situations that, the guy that everybody's hyping up is not that guy.
Yeah, it's funny how things work out. And man, again, the handful of Houston games I've watched, I mean, the combo of Thompson and Tari Eason together, it's like, how are you supposed to score on these guys? They're just such a combo. And then you add Şengün to that. It's unbelievable. But I'm happy for you guys. I still do have faith in Scoot. I don't think he's a bust. I don't think he's going to live up to the hype. Don't get me wrong, but I do think you have an NBA starter in there with a valuable-ish skill set. One thing that does surprise me, again, I sort of talked about the the lack of athleticism compared to the hype, but he's a much better just standard point guard, right? Like everyone's like, oh, it's Russ Westbrook this, it's John Morant that, but that kind of classic, just bring the ball up, run the offense, make the right read. Really good at that. And that sounds so basic, right? That's high school basketball. It's a fundamental that you learn, but so much of the NBA has gotten away from that it's kind of refreshing to see. I just think the shooting has to come along. I sort of disagree with a lot of his usage. I mean, look, this is a guy who's a weak outside shooter who a lot of the time is just being parked in the 3-point in the corner. You should never park a 31% guy who's 6'2" in the corner. just why are you doing that? But for some reason, Portland is. The last 2 games, Coach Billups has been out. Unfortunately, his grandmother passed, so he's missed the last 2 games. That hasn't happened, and Scoot Henderson has excelled. So I think maybe next year when coaching contracts expire and they are not renewed, maybe you start to see a little bit of an emergence there.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how it plays out. And I don't know if Billups is like this game-changing coach. So I feel like maybe, if they brought in somebody else, you look and see what Brooklyn has. And it's really interesting, with their coach, how much that has played into the fact that Mike Brown is gone. All of a sudden they're struggling without him on their staff. And you sometimes, if you can find that particular guy, and Billups just seems like maybe he's just one of these guys that you run through until you find the right guy.
Yeah, I mean, and I want to be clear, out of all the coaches I've talked to, like Chauncey Billups is one of the best, if not the best. He's so giving with his time. He's honest, almost to a fault. I mean, he keeps it real. He seems like a genuinely good guy. He understands basketball. I just don't know that he's a head coach. He had never been a head coach, and his entire coaching experience, it was 1 year as an assistant under Ty Lue, and then you gave him a 4-year, basically 5-year deal, team option for the 5th year. It's not going to be picked up. I questioned the decision at the time, and then you go, okay, well, maybe this is the guy. You move younger, less experienced. A lot of those guys have had success, especially in the rebuilds, bringing up young teams. It's a process, but I just wonder how early in his tenure, maybe how buttoned up everything was. Terry Stotts, who really had a reputation as a player's coach, free flowing, do your thing. We'll play defense sometimes, but we're going to outscore the other team. But practice, organization, that stuff was buttoned up. It was tight. And maybe it hasn't seemed that way with Coach Billups, especially in year 1 and year 2. But ultimately at this point, I'm willing to give a guy a chance to learn. He's never done it before. And he said every year, like, I got to get better. I got to do this. I have to do that. He's accountable. But at a certain point, it's like year 4, you're saying you got to get better. Like, what is the offense? I'm not even criticizing the offensive system. I don't know what it is. I just don't know. You run a dribble handoff up high and, maybe, okay, Ayton hasn't touched the ball in a little bit, so you give it to him, and otherwise have Simons dribble it for 18 seconds, and then maybe it's him or Grant that terminates. And Shaedon Sharpe had 21 points through 3 quarters, and then he doesn't play for a 10-minute stretch in the 4th, even though he's hot. I just question it. I don't know that he's that guy. Sorry, Blazers fans. He's going to be here through the year. There's no sense in starting over. You're trying to get a high pick. But I think what we saw under, Nate Bjorkson over the last 2 games just kind of showed it. Again, small sample size warning, 2 games means nothing. But I watch these games, man, and I break these games down. And the offense looked totally different. The defense looked different. And not even in a, how every team, when the coach gets fired, they always have a great game the next game. And then things sort of regress to the mean. It was just, it looks like a different team. And I'm not even talking about guys who are playing harder. It was just, they're doing something. They're running something. Novel concept.
Yeah, well, we have dealt with all of that with the Silas years going into Udoka, so we definitely understand. He's at Peter Sampson on X, the podcast Bleav in Blazers. Anything you want to plug, Peter? Any final thoughts?
No, man. If you're a Rockets fan, enjoy this season. You guys are fun to watch, man. Saw it building last season. I mean, I remember I sitting on press row. I was talking to John Hollinger from The Athletic, and we were both like, dude, this guy is – and I know it's his nickname now, basically, but this guy truly is baby Jokic, Alperen Sengun. I mean, what a foundational piece you guys have.
Thank you, and we are loving it, no question about it. Rockets fans have been through the mill the last few years, so this has been a lot of fun, and thank you so much for giving us some time. Thanks so much for coming on with us.
Yeah, appreciate you having me.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.